The arts isn't a secondary thing, it's not a luxury, it is very much part of how a lot of people view themselves, how they construct their identity, how they maintain their own well-being, to express themselves in the world, to feel like they're being heard.
It's not enough to have that scientific knowledge about what you've got to do. You have to have that understanding of human behaviour, of how people absorb information, how they use it, and the arts just happen to be really good at that.
We can actually take what we learn from the arts, both in terms of the practice but also the interactions, and translate that into effective programs that can enrich societies.
Artists are able to be much more flexible and ambitious perhaps in the way they work, and not make assumptions about older people and what they do and don't like, or can and can't learn, or may not enjoy.
It's a human right to have access to the arts and collective creativity, because they open up for everybody radical imagination.
The Creative Doodle book allows a particularly kind of playful and open way of working. There's very much no right or wrong answer. The word doodling kind of has that idea of drifting off in a relaxed, kind of reflective moment where things can happen that you don't anticipate or plan for. And it's also very inclusive. It's open to anybody to engage with the tasks in the Creative Doodle book in all sorts of ways or at any level.
We were in the middle of lockdown and we were able to get some funding and go online and create a programme of creativity that was purely through Zoom.
So we shifted to online practice. And the ways in which the arts did so was creative, it was resilient, it was adaptive in all sorts of really amazing ways.
There was a real equality around all being in the same space. Despite where we were, where our backgrounds were, we were all in the same space together and had an equal portion of screen to share creativity with.
And one of the very striking things about the Doodle book was it was a tangible resource that people could have in their hands. They got posted at home and they received it. And so when they went on to these Zoom workshops, which we had all suddenly had to learn how to do, you had something in your hand which you were doing in your own space, well knowing that other people were doing the same thing at the same time with you, but apart. I think the Doodle book allowed people to discover something about themselves, and also to use that to discover something about other people in the group they're working with.
I'm not a creative person, but it's really helped me because it makes me focus what I want to do on it.
It gave me creative ideas flowing and I don't have to think too much.
Instead of doing something normally like normal drawing, it makes me think, how would I do that other ways? How to do it different ways?
I like this task because you can colour different squares and stuff and you can do what you like, and that really helps my mind think what to do on the page.
It's not always about what's right or wrong answer. It could be anything that they feel is related to the book. So it could be creative what they feel.
Playing in creativity brings a lightness that's really useful, particularly when life was feeling so uncertain.
Lockdown I found really hard because, like you say, you couldn't go out, and the Doodle book really helped me be creative more.
It relaxes me, and through lockdown this kept me going. If it didn't have this, I would have been going crazy.
Very good from a mental health perspective, very good from just a well-being, just be able to express yourself way as well.
I think one of the really important things about the Creative Doodle book is how it asks people to think about themselves in playful and reflective ways, not through direct questioning. It never asks you to think about yourself, but it asks you to reflect upon what's important to you, how you relate to other people, how you see the world. And that in a very open, reflective and playful way, encourages people to take a kind of agency over their identity, to think about what's important to them, and to have an opportunity to have other people listen to that. So in the Zoom workshops, people would find out things about each other in a way that allowed them to feel heard and listened to.
It's a way to find a voice, and there are very few ways to be able to have a voice that doesn't come across as antagonistic.
We learnt a lot about how resilient the community arts are and how essential they are to people's well-being in a way that isn't an additional luxury. It's not that nice thing you do, but is that essential thing that is part of who makes you you, something that helps you cope with the ups and downs of life, gives you a place to express yourself, gives you a group to hear your kind of daily or weekly lives.
Yeah, I think it's really good for everyone to be able to start to use this book a lot more around the world, even abroad, because then be able to use their imagination for them to be creative, because some people might struggle with how they're feeling, and using this book helps them to bring out how they're feeling and put their feeling into the page.
There were two really interesting things from the Doodle book that we want to continue. One, we developed a network of learning disability community arts groups who were working with us on the same questions, on the same projects across the country, and there was a really exciting network of practitioners there. And the second thing was that the Doodle book is a really good way of asking people complex questions in accessible ways. So we want to bring those two things together and develop a peer research project using the Doodle book to work with learning disabled artists to explore questions about identity, agency and representation. A really exciting new methodology of ensuring that people with learning disabilities can participate in research about the things that matter to them.
I suppose what runs behind all the projects, including the one that we've been doing about autism in Peru and looking at how young people with autism have been affected by the pandemic, but all of the projects are really about self-care. Arts organizations have been very involved for many, many years in thinking with young people and looking after them, in creating structures where their agency is advanced, where they can actually be taking responsibilities for their lives, where they can learn about being citizens, learn about taking care of themselves, learn about taking care of others. There's something, I think, very special about what an arts organization does to enable people, young people, to learn about becoming and to be in a state of becoming in which they can challenge. The pandemic stopped us, actually stopped us doing our work in a way that was hugely frustrating, but we were also having to reinvent. So we've been really looking at that central area, the shift to the digital and its impact on work that has always been so essentially physical and part of being present in people's lives. For the young people were positive about the platforms they were using. They did talk about how it felt a more democratic space at times. It's a world that they're used to. One of the major learnings is the learning about digital poverty. You know, we are not equal. As we know, in the UK, there are real cold spots, as the Arts Council calls them, around provision. I don't think anyone will come out of that without thinking in different ways about access and participation. In that speeded up moment where the arts organizations had to reinvent themselves as different agencies. And I don't just mean about mental health and well-being, actually in a lot of the contexts we work with in Latin America, but even in some contexts in the UK, territorially based community arts organizations often have a better understanding of the fabric of society than other government agencies. They were able to mobilize very quickly, certainly in the context here in Latin America, to distribute food, to make sure information got out there, to information that was trustworthy when there was so much false information, because they were trusted partners within those communities. If there is a move towards social prescribing and the idea of how the arts can fulfill that role, there needs to be better links between sectors, the health sectors and the arts sectors. What the AHRC money paid for, though, was to enable those arts organisations and those artists and those young people to join us as researchers. You know, and I think the principle behind it was to say, this is not us researching you, it's about setting up processes by which you can reflect on this incredible period we've been going through together. So hopefully in a meaningful way, that there was a diversity of voices producing the research. To have a common global experience of the pandemic that is experienced so differently in each context is a very rare moment. And the arts is a great way to share that between them. And because some of their languages of youth culture are pretty, if not universal, global, it means that they can quickly get there. You know, the rhythm of the rap or the poetry or the music they're interested in, or the type of visuals that they want to create, they're pretty shared. And then you can, but also enough to see the differences.
We had already been testing ways of working with people who are housebound and were living at home. Particularly in the winter months, we can find some of our programmes are less well attended because of illness and weather. So it was something that we were dipping our toes in anyway. When the pandemic hit, it became everything we were doing. So really overnight, the team worked with our artists, our community members, our volunteers, our staff team to create a really far-reaching programme.
Well, for me, the pandemic, it was a horrible thing, and it still is, and because it's going on. But during the pandemic, with the Albany, they kept in touch with us, me, and Hall.
You're all on your own, and there's nobody just me there. So I wouldn't mind. I like being with the choir. And I like being with the drummer.
Some of those people are isolated. They wouldn't actually see anyone, and because of lockdown as well, I also felt very isolated.
I live on my own. Nobody come round, you know, don't see anyone. Knock on the door, nothing, see how you are. It's really tough, really, really tough.
A lot of our communities are digitally disconnected. They don't have access to Wi-Fi or aren't confident using computers. So we had to build a programme that, unlike lots of other cultural organisations who kind of worked with computers and Zoom and all those different platforms, we had to find other ways of doing it. So that's when things got really creative.
Even though it's over the phone, you got another connection of people, you know, because about 8 in the group, I suppose, and it's, although you don't see him, you just visualise, you know, yeah, if it weren't for that, I mean, I'd really crack.
For me, there's a big thing about, like, sharing time together. I think that's my current, like, definition of music and, like, why it's important for people. So people sharing in the same moment, and you can't really step outside of that at the time. So I think people being on this phone call, even with the ironic kind of time delay between our voices, we're all sharing in the same listening at the same time. And that's quite, you create quite a bond, I think, when you're doing that.
There was one lady, she used to just sing goodbye, and it was just so lovely. It was honestly, I honestly would feel like I would be in tears sometimes.
We also did a lot of work safely, visiting people at their homes, so doing doorstep performances, delivering creative boxes. We did a fantastic project where we delivered 250 gnomes. It was called Gnomes at Home, to people across Lewisham.
The last time of his poetry, they went around to different addresses, which they came to mine, and things that we did in the poetry, they performed it at our gates, which was it's really wonderful.
There was enthusiasm and people wanted to come back and share what they'd made or share their stories and feel like somebody was there to listen, because that's the important thing, that someone is actually there to listen to you.
What was built during the pandemic was this incredible sense of community, not just with the community members, if you like, but actually with our artists and volunteers and staff team who were often feeling isolated themselves in different ways.
It made me feel as if I had something to offer, which I didn't knew at the time that I had. It made me feel worthwhile. That's it, yeah. And that somebody really cared about us, not me alone, but us, you understand? And they're doing a wonderful work.
A lot of the work that's going on, a lot of the impacts, a lot of the successes, a lot of the challenges, I hope and I believe that the work that we're doing is in a place that can capture all of that and can capture it in a really rich way and then communicate that back so that people can see, yes, there's impact. Yes, this is something that's quite important. We'll be able to help arts organizations to understand what they can do to reach their service users in different ways, what they can do to help their service providers in a range of different contexts, whether that's remote or in person. I really do want to see whether the things we're doing, if that can be translated into policy, because I think it's actually very important to recognize what the cultural and creative industries have and what they can contribute. One of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is focused on health and well-being, right? That's something that's important and needed for societies worldwide. And one of the ways that you can actually get that is through, cultural and creative activities. And I think that this is something that academics and research can really help these industries with. This is why these kinds of collaborations are important, because you can use the skills that you have, whether that's in quantitative or qualitative work, and help these organizations to create the messages that are needed to showcase why they're important, to showcase their impacts, and to showcase the possibilities.
We were aware that people living in care homes were some of the people who were the hardest hit during the pandemic. In fact, at one point, half of all deaths across Europe were of people living in care homes. People with dementia were experiencing something called responsive behaviours, so becoming quite upset and agitated, which can occur because of lack of stimulation. So we wanted to design something that could be sent to people through the post or digitally to try and provide them with stimulation and interaction and make them feel less isolated. I hope in some small way that the Culture Box project shines a light on the incredible work that those staff members do under extremely challenging circumstances. And one of the things they said about the project was it brought a little ray of sunshine in. It gave them some ideas and support at a time of immense challenge.
We really had to think creatively about how we could still, give people quite a rich cultural experience, even though we couldn't be physically in touch with them and vice versa. Digital
access was a challenge for a number of our participants, and I think that's something we need to work on in terms of making sure people have access to high quality broadband, really good IT equipment. We used a methodology called participatory action research, and that was really important because it was iterative and dynamic, and it meant that we could change things as we went along. So we found out that things like nature-based themes were really popular with people, as well as the visual arts activities.
My name is Joyce Backstrom and I am 91 years old and we live in Hazel Grove Court in Salburn. I loved taking part in the Culture Box project, especially while we have been in lockdown. I wait with excitement every month to see what is going to be in the box.
My name is Carol Coppinger and I am 89 years old and live in Hazel Grove Court in Salburn. And I've been taking part in the Culture Box project for the past year.
We wanted to create something that was really stimulating and interesting and challenging as well.
I love it when there is an art and craft activity in the box. My favourite's been the creative doodling, watercolour, painting and making a snowman.
I especially love nature and have loved listening to the bird songs that have been in the Culture Box. It was lovely whilst in lockdown, being able to listen to these bird songs and forget that we were in the middle of a pandemic.
During the lockdown, there's art and craft activities help keep me occupied and not fret about the virus.
In each box was a different tree that was talked about. We would open this up into a multi-sensory experience, so they could read about it, they could listen to music, there were objects that people could touch. It opened up this interest into a kind of multifaceted experience. The final box was had seeds that people could plant. It's just opening up that different way of engaging with the world.
It was sad to do when Sharon showed us the final Culture Box, but as we planned the nasturtium and watched it grow, it will be an everlasting memory.
It is sad that the Culture Box project is coming to an end, but the records of the different bird songs will be there to listen to forever.
I used to work in the NHS mental health services, so this was a hospital environment where people were admitted to the hospital who were having mental health issues, and the primary mode of treatment was the use of medication. I did a photography project with some of the patients. Their well-being could be so improved by something that wasn't medical.
One of the characteristics of dementia is often that people have problems communicating. Maybe they can't find the right words. In later stages of dementia, people can lose speech altogether, and I think the arts and humanities provide a way of connecting and communicating that doesn't require language, and that's what's so powerful about it.
I think art engages with the individual, whereas medicine engages with the generic.
The project has really increased my interest in working with people from diverse communities, because I'm very aware that lots of the art forms and the artists that we work with, that I've worked with in my previous work, come from a very white Western type of background, and I'm really interested in how we work with different communities.
My message for policymakers would be to do with access to the arts and culture of people living in closed institutions. I think they're the very last audience that people think about. The people in those institutions have just probably even more need actually to engage with arts and culture, and they can't get to it. And I think that people need to come up with more imaginative ways of engaging with that audience. The finale of the project is going to be, we're calling it the Culture Box Show, but again it's remote. It's going to be online and also via the boxes.
We've commissioned a number of artists to respond to the project and to use that as part of our dissemination. So I think that's quite exciting. Legacy part of the project as well. Thinking about connecting with people who are unable to visit those places, even perhaps when the pandemic's over. There's lots of work to be done about how we can develop those different formats, how we can develop those connections and make people feel more part of the community.
This project was born out of that kind of noticing the real emphasis on walking in that first lockdown in March 2020, kind of really feeling an awareness that for many people it was the only thing that was allowed to do. Many people took part in things like even the rainbow trails in the windows that people did for the NHS. One of the main strands at the start of the project was to capture data through a public survey, and we had over 1,000 responses to that with some really, really rich data. So something that we've learned from that is that people really looked at their local environment in a different way and engaged with it in a different way. That for some people that sort of sense of being trapped, or the repetition, or the impossibility of escape from a quite small area that might have at first have felt very restrictive, people looked for creative ways to kind of transform that. Now that in some cases that was because they were artists who were either adapting their work to happen on a walk or using walking, or through what we kind of think of acts of kind of civic creativity or community creativity, spontaneous projects. I'm thinking of things like painted stones or chalk pavement markings that again kind of flourished in those lockdown conditions, where people were really looking for ways to connect with one another and to bring a bit of variety into their very limited permitted daily exercise. We've curated a gallery of walking art, and that is really extraordinary in the diversity of creative practices that it represents. There are artists whose work is very much about socially engaged practice, so working with people, bringing people together to experience a walk, either together in space and time or connected remotely, either through social media or sharing of prompts. We've learnt that really those activities support people to find something new in what previously felt very familiar and like it had no capacity to go anywhere else. We have commissioned 8 different walking art projects. Those are dotted all around the UK. So for example, there's a project in Glasgow by Stephen Anderson and Laura Bradshaw, who are working with people receiving end-of-life care. They're using audio to capture participants' kind of stories of place and location, and they're working in hospice grounds to create work that can be experienced by residents in the hospice, but also by staff and by family members as well. Another is a project that's with one of our partners, Open Clasp Theatre Company in Newcastle, a theatre writer and facilitator duo who are working with young women on their perceptions of safety on the streets. So really looking at how gender and urban space kind of intersect, kind of collide in feelings of safety or lack of safety, trying to kind of engender some walking work that will support young women to feel safer in the streets, but also to really communicate the ways in which they don't feel safe. One thing that really strikes me that I think is really, really important about the work that we're doing is demonstrating how resilient cultural practices can be if they are able to adapt and use things like walking as a way to maintain cultural offer even in the most difficult of circumstances such as a pandemic.